Welcome to Inside Academia, the weekly program where we take a look behind the ivory curtain, seeking a frank discussion of American education. I'm your host, Andy Nash. My guest this week is Mr. Malcolm Kline. He's Executive Director of Accuracy in Academia, which is a nonprofit research group based in Washington, D.C., working to return education to its traditional mission, the quest for truth. He's also editor of Accuracy in Media and their series Special Reports, and he's been published in USA Today, the American Enterprise, Human Events, the Washington Times, the National Catholic Registrar, and several others. Malcolm Kline, thank you for joining us on Inside Academia.
Thank you for having me.
I'd like to talk to you today about your organization and what it's been doing with respect to higher education in particular, as well as what it's been doing with its sister group, Accuracy in Media. First, give us a background of Accuracy in Academia, as well as Accuracy in Media, how they both got started and when, and what is your involvement and your role since its inception?
Accuracy in Media started in 1969 by our founder, Reed Irvine, because he found too little accuracy in the media, particularly at the time in regard to reporting on the Vietnam War. He came to see the same problem in academia and started Accuracy in Academia in 1985. I might add that one difference between the two is that in Accuracy in Academia, we're dealing with a much more captive audience with fewer places to go and more difficulty in getting there. Mm-hmm. You can switch channels more easily than you can switch schools, in other words.
Oh, I see. Okay.
We focus on what professors are saying and how accurate it is. We look a lot at historians, a lot at political science professors, but we also make a point of attending the annual Modern Language Association conference, which draws just about all the English teachers on the planet. Mm-hmm. And that's interesting, too, because they have thousands of members, half of which still number in the thousands, go to these. And then they have 700 panels featuring about 3 professors apiece, so like 1,000 some professors. We can't catch all 1,000, but we do the best we can. The interesting thing is that of those 700 panels, very few are about language. Just a few more about Shakespeare. Mostly new wave stuff or things lately like how to send better text messages. Lots and lots of class struggle stuff, because even though the MLA, Modern Language Association, is quite left of center, there's a splinter group within it that thinks they're too conservative, and there's even a radical MLA caucus, mm-hmm. which is more left-wing than the MLA itself. At any rate, so we cover about 300 professors a year from about 300 universities, and then on top of that, we give you the story you're not likely to get, students aren't likely to get when they're actually looking through the course catalog. Mm-hmm. We try to give depth. We try to be all about depth, and nothing sets us off more than reading things like some academics saying that Social Security is an example of how well a government program can work. It is an example of how a government program can work. How well it can work, well, that's another question. At any rate, we also, if you're ever down in D.C., realize that it's so hard for students to actually hear the other side, even in extracurricular activities. So we have authors' nights, where they'll be exposed to authors that they're not likely to see in the campus bookstore. Oh, and I should mention, a highlight of our history was getting thrown off the campus at Columbia back in 1999.
Okay, and what happened to cause that?
Well, what happened to cause that, that was long before I came on board. I wish I could take credit for it, but I can't. What happened was we sponsored a 2-day conference at Columbia entitled, "Is There a Place at the Academic Table for Conservative Ideas?" After night number 1, which featured a discussion on quotas by the trustee at the time, University of California Board of Trustees,
Right.
who was trying to overturn them, Columbia canceled the second day of the conference. So I guess they proved that there is not a place at the academic table for conservative ideas, at least in Columbia. AIA then held it on Morningside Heights in a park the next day across the street from the school. So that was quite a seminal moment for us and a learning experience. I've been here at AIA since 2003. We also have published an economic textbook by a journalism professor who actually did understand economics. He's no longer with us, unfortunately, but the textbook is. And it's entitled, actually the full title is Voodoo Anyone, How to Understand Economics Without Really Trying. It's nice and user-friendly. Go ahead.
Yeah, so let me ask you, one of the things that I understand your organization has been doing is publishing a periodical, I guess, called Campus Report,
Yeah.
which is like a news magazine, sort of newspaper turned into news magazine sort of thing that's disseminated, I think, is on a weekly basis or a monthly basis.
The newsletter comes out monthly.
Okay.
Yeah. We do an average of 30 stories a month on the website, www.academia.org. But then we do a separate set of stories for the Campus Report newsletter because there is no shortage of material here.
Right, and that's distributed on many different college campuses and has been since, I guess, the 90s, if I'm correct.
Yeah, in fact, a little story about that. I found myself one year going down to the Research Triangle in North Carolina 3 or 4 times, so I'd bring campus reports with me. And this gentleman called to say he wanted to subscribe because he was wearing out his old copies. And as it happens, the copies I brought with me focused on all those schools in the Triangle, Duke, UNC, Chapel Hill, Wake Forest, or just outside. Well, he lived next to the chancellor at UNC Chapel Hill.
Mm-hmm.
So what he would do is go out when the guy was up in his ladder trimming his hedges and read to him the stories that we did on UNC Chapel Hill, which made this gentleman's yard work much more interesting.
I bet. So I guess let me come back to the whole juxtaposition between media and academia for a moment. There's a lot of parallels, and there's as far as the usual bias is concerned. And I got to ask you first. I mean, what do you think is the cause of this, in your opinion? I mean, do you think it's pretty much just because of there's a preponderance of like-minded ideologues who are academics who happen to also be left-wing politically, and consequently they both spur that onto their students as well as their journalism students? Or what is the cause of that? Is it just radical activists on the part of students, which we've seen since the 60s? What do you think is the cause of the one-sidedness that you've observed and chronicled with your countless issues of Campus Report?
Here's one startling difference in the 30 years. By the way, I'm a native Pennsylvanian from Reading. I went to school in Scranton. We were just chatting about it, this pastor and I, last night. The startling difference is there were always liberal professors. I mean, at one point we were sitting in the office when Mr. Irvine was alive. He was 80. I think we had somebody who was 18, so we had a pretty broad age range. None of us could remember a time when there were not predominantly left-wing professors on campus. And we're talking about a span of 60 years or better,
Right.
So that has always been there. One startling difference is that 30 years ago, when I was in college, you would actually have to go to the professor after class to draw them out on their political sympathies, if you really wanted to know. That's not the case anymore. It's the class. You get them right in class. There's not one question you could possibly have about where they stand politically that you won't know by the time you leave the classroom. Yeah. The trick is, what will you know by way of substantive information? And to that degree, you not only have a more left-wing professoriate, but a more, as you say, politicized left-wing professoriate. You know, because there are liberal professors you can reason with, whether they'll ever agree with you or not, and who will dutifully, although they're getting farther and fewer between, present information that does not support their view, because they're trying to be good researchers first and foremost. You know.
Let me jump in.
Unfortunately, Pac-Man, they're being swallowed up. Go ahead.
Right. But let me ask you there. I mean, many people would. How do you react to the statement that says that of all the problems plaguing higher education and academia, bias is just one of many. In fact, it's number 101 out of a list of 100 problems that people cite as far as the lack of, first and foremost, there's a lack of substance being offered. There's a lack of a core curriculum. There's a lack of all sorts of things just within education alone before there is a significant problem of bias. And then there's the question of how egregious and widespread it is versus how subtle it is. Yeah. So how do you quickly respond to that insofar as the mission of your organization?
Bottom line, I would agree with that because there are a horde of problems. One is it's so insular. For example, the Modern Language Association. Do you know that every English professor in the country gets hired at that convention?
You mean if they attend the convention, they get hired? Yeah. Is that what you mean?
That's where every English department does its job interviews.
Oh, okay. That's the recruiting ground.
That is the recruiting ground.
Okay.
There's about 20 sessions just on that, you know. And there are panels where they're just parading their theses. I have to be careful saying that word, in order to essentially use it as a verbal resume. I've sat in on a few of these. In fact, I sat in on one where there were 3 girls presenting these off-the-wall theses on witchcraft in Peru, you know,
right,
for the benefit of one professor and an audience of one. That one was me. This was in a hotel in Philadelphia. We were joined in progress by a couple of tourists from Asia who spoke no English, and then, my favorite, 3 drunks from the sports bar who passed out. So, came question and answer time. I tried to go as easy as I could on the girls, because I was the only one there to ask any.
Right.
You know?
Right.
So, there is that insular nature. Combined with it, you can't ignore the question of tenure. Now, I have heard from the few conservative academics still out there, and I think I know most of them, there are so few, that if you eliminate tenure, the first people they'll get rid of are the conservative academics. And this sounds compelling until you remember that this was the argument when the FCC got rid of the fairness doctrine. There was actually a split among conservatives, because some argued we're practically invisible on radio now, no pun intended. With the fairness doctrine gone, we won't exist. And it sounded logical enough at the time, and Reed Irvine actually did argue that. But lo and behold, they got rid of the fairness doctrine, and we got Rush Limbaugh and a parade that followed him.
Mm-hmm.
Reed later admitted that he changed his mind, and events proved his fears were not founded.
And so you're also editor of Accuracy Media Special Reports.
Yes.
What parallels can you draw with that in about a minute that we have left here?
First, I should point out that the latest campus report focuses on the journalism school at Medill,
Okay.
and specifically the faculty there. They are about as activist as they are academic, a pretty politicized faculty. At any rate, so you can see the direct link right there. And that is indeed where a lot of biases do start. We're looking at Columbia now and who's teaching there, what they're teaching. So, yeah, at its most benign, the emphasis on silly, superficial questions, I think I'll just have a primal screen next time I hear a reporter say, "How do you feel about it?" How often have you heard that one? How do you feel about it? Particularly of plane crash survivors, where it's kind of ghoulish.
Right.
Yeah.
Trying to evoke an emotional response.
Yeah. But our latest special report that we're putting together now is on something very interesting, which is the way the Washington Post and the New York Times, which govern much of the news cycle, even in their declining state, have treated President Obama in his first 2 years compared to the way they treated President Reagan in his first 2 years. It's quite startling. Never during the Reagan years did they run an article on the hidden benefits of unemployment as they have in the Obama years. There have been at least 2 of these in the Washington Post. One on how it allows you to spend more time with your families, and another on how it keeps the crime rate down because stay-at-home dads who are discouraged workers act as a crime prevention tool.
Okay, well, Malcolm Kline, I want to thank you for joining us today here on Inside Academia. That's about all the time we have. I'd like to discuss this further with you. Perhaps at a future time we can look more closely at some other examples. So I'm your host, Andy Nash. This has been Inside Academia. Join us again next week, as every week, as we take you for a look behind the Ivory Curtain.